I'd like to welcome everybody to this Friday's seminar, the first of the new academic year, which is really wonderful. My name is Amanda Vincent. I'm a professor in the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, and I lead a marine conservation team called Project Seahorse. And I have the joy of launching us into this series of really wonderful talks. So I'd like to thank by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Some of you who are on Zoom may well have be on other important ancestral lands, and we acknowledge as well the custodians and stewards of those lands around the world. In this seminar, if you have questions, we invite you to put them in the chat, or eventually when we get to that question period to raise your hand in the reaction button on Zoom. I'd like to remind everybody that it's really important that we have a positive, constructive experience and show particular respect for graduate students and young early career scholars. So please keep all questions and all comments positive, and as they say, avoid being dispiriting. So no dispiriting comments for William at all. So I'm really delighted to introduce William. Of course, I've known William for rather a long time, but I thought I'd have a quick browse on the web just to see what was going on. And the first William Cheung I found is a Hong Kong Kung Fu practitioner who is a grandmaster. And he's actually responsible for introducing Bruce Lee to his mentor and patron. However, the second William Cheung that went on for pages and pages and pages was our own William Cheung. So that led me into some interesting lines of reading. He is, of course, it's tempting to say he needs no introduction, but in fact, he does need an introduction because lots of you don't know him or don't know everything about him. So he's professor and director, of course, of our own Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, and I would say a highly admirable director who constantly has everybody's best interests at heart. So we thank you for that, William. He's also got a Canada Research Chair in Ocean Sustainability and Global Change. We're going to hear about some of that work, while he also serves as PI of the Changing Ocean Research Unit. But something that's close to my heart is that William is an expert at translating science into policy. And that's something that this unit is very proud of doing, and most of our faculty focus on that to quite an extent. So he plays a role in the various panels on climate change and biodiversity ecosystem services to a notable extent. He's won God knows how many awards, but particularly the E.R. Stacy Memorial Fellowship, which is the top NSERC award for early career scientists, the Prix d'Excellence Award of ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of Seas. And in fact, I didn't realize, my discovery was named as Reuters as one of the top 20 world's most influential marine climate scientists. Top 20, that's pretty extraordinary. Anyhow, so he did his PhD here, and then was at UE before we got him back. So that much, we could go on and on about his scientific bio, but the thing I found particularly fun is he's an ultra runner. So he doesn't run on the flat, which would be far too easy, but he does 50-kilometer races across mountains, for heaven's sakes. So this man has just done 50 kilometers in under 7 hours, 6 hours and 59 minutes, I think, in the Diez Vistas this year. So if he's not working with all of us, he's out keeping his sanity together, which I admire greatly. So with that, I'm going to invite William to share his thoughts.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for the wonderful introduction. Let me put the mic on my shirt because I will be holding it for a while. Thanks. And it's a really good morning and good afternoon, whoever is joining online as well from anywhere in the world. Thank you very much for these opportunities for me to speak today in the first RF Fish 500 seminar. And it's really good to see friends, colleagues coming back from the summer, and I hope you all had a good start of the term. And I would like to start by mentioning about the background of this cover slide. I picked it deliberately. Anyone knows where it is from? Anyone? This is from my hometown where I grew up in Hong Kong. This place holds really deep personal significance for me, and that's where my fascinations with the oceans began. And my presentation starts here as well. As a child, I spent a lot of time by the sea, as some of you know, observing the marine life and things that are so closely tied to the ocean. But over the years, I also witnessed dramatic changes in the sea just over there. I live in the village just up on the left side of the coast. And these experiences really shaped my academic path that led to focus on the future of our oceans, particularly at the intersection between food security, climate change, and biodiversity. So the story of my talk begins in this place in Hong Kong, but it's also a global story, one that touches every coast and community reliant on the ocean. My focus today will be on the challenges and solutions at this nexus of food, climate, and biodiversity challenges, drawing on both my own work as well as those from many brilliant colleagues, including those here. In my talk, I will first introduce the food, climate, and biodiversity nexus and why it is crucial for understanding ocean's futures. Then I will introduce an international partnership that I'm now spending a lot of my time working with and that partnership aims at solving sustainability challenges. I will explain the approaches, including the key case studies. I will also illustrate it with some recent works and findings. And finally, I will discuss how those approaches can shape policy and action. These fish species, golden threadfin beam, large-scale croaker, and four-finger threadfin, these were a normal part of my household diet when I was growing up. I came from a low-income family, and these fish were affordable sources of protein and nutrients, and they're delicious too. I have vivid memories of how my parents and my grandparents prepared them. Pan frying the golden threadfin beam, steaming large-scale croaker, and one of my grandma's favorite, which is the salted and dried four-finger threadfin beam. And she can have a small piece for the whole and a big bowl of rice. That's like really satisfying lunch for her already. However, things have changed dramatically in the late 1990s. At the time, the Fishery Center here, which was the predecessor of the IOF, they conducted a number of studies with the government of Hong Kong, and their studies conclude that the fishery resources were already largely overexploited. White-caught large yellow croaker, which is the middle fish here there, for example, is now near commercial extinction. The market price is now crazy for a single wild-caught large yellow croaker, which is around this size. It is now costing around 1,000 Canadian dollar, which is extraordinary for a fish that was a staple when I was growing up. The price of a large wild-caught four-finger threadfin is not as crazy, but still much more expensive than what we used to when we were growing up. It's now more than 30 times in terms of the market price, even accounting for the increase in value. So you will see these large yellow croaker and four-fin beams are still quite common in Hong Kong market, but they are almost exclusively from mariculture. While mariculture helps to maintain supply, but it poses an additional or different set of sustainability challenges, including the potential impacts on ecosystems and the demand for feed, because these are all predatory fishes. So the shift from wild to mariculture or farm fish is also an indicator of how the pressure of our oceans are changing, and that the sustainability challenges of the oceans are also rising. And in Hong Kong, seafood consumption has increased dramatically over the years, and largely is driven by wealth. Even as local fishery resources have been in decline, the demand for fish and seafood has rises extremely. To give you a sense of the scale of the seafood demand, the seafood consumption rate on average in Canada is around a quarter of what is nowadays in Hong Kong. And to sustain this demand, despite the declining local resources, it's a clear indications of how deeply both the culture as well as the challenges that we are facing. And when I was born, the ocean was already warming. The left-hand side of this figure shows the observed sea surface temperature in Hong Kong waters. The color stripe represent the temperature, annual average temperature of the water, which is also represented by the black line there. And what it is striking also is that even though when I was born in the 1970s, the ocean is already warmer than my parents' generations. But for my nephews that was born just a decade ago, they are experiencing an ocean that is even much warmer than what I've experienced. And this really highlights that in addition to the demand and overexploitations, climate change is also a looming threats and impacts affecting the sustainability of the oceans and food supply for us as well. So if we look into this photo, which shows my two nephews with my sister there, just having fun by the seaside in Hong Kong, it reminds me of the deep connections my family and my and many families in general that I have with the oceans. And I can't help looking at this ocean photo, wondering what kind of ocean futures will my nephew experience, whether they can still enjoy the kind of fish that I have had, and also the kind of relationship that they would develop with the oceans in the future is likely to be very different from mine. Oh.
That's fine. We can look for our phones after.
And thanks for doing with that. So, and drawing that to the bigger picture as we move forward, it is recognized that the decline in marine biodiversity, the challenges that I experience or Hong Kong experience is not unique. It is happening all around the world. And these changes are driven by human activities, the overexploitations, other changes in the oceans, including habitat changes, invasive species, pollutions. They are all affecting marine ecosystems and biodiversity, which also affects the ability of the oceans to provide these important services to us: food, livelihood, and culture. At the same time, the oceans are absorbing more than 23% of the carbon dioxide that we emitted, as well as more than 90% of the heat that we generated. It is great that the ocean is doing this big climate service for us. Without the oceans, our planet would not be livable. But in a sense, it also affects the ocean's conditions for marine life. The ocean is warming, it is undergoing acidification, and it is also deoxygenating. And these are affecting marine biodiversity as well. At the same time, marine biodiversity and ecosystem play a very important role in climate mitigations and regulation as well. So this really creates a vicious cycle of human impacts affecting both the climate and biodiversity that then feed back into affecting the climate or exacerbating the climate changes and their impacts on biodiversity. Just to give you a few sense of the global scale impacts that humans are having on the ecosystems and the food systems. The left-hand side shows the global seafood productions from fisheries and mariculture. It clearly shows that in recent decades, fisheries and mariculture production in total, even combining with the rapid expansions of mariculture, it still shows a decline in seafood productions in recent decades. And compounding that, a substantial amount of those seafood is used for fish meal and fish oil production, which is shown by the red line there, which really exacerbate the issues about pressures on ecosystem, as well as the diversions of important nutrients away from human consumption. Okay. Sorry, don't know what happened. It is showing up.
Must be the projector, because I can see it online.
Okay. Sorry about that. So while they are fixing that, as I mentioned, even though with the decline in the seafood productions, global fish and seafood consumption continue. That really mirror what we are seeing in Hong Kong. In the next slide, what I'm showing you is that there are solid evidence that climate change is already affecting ecosystems. And that's a figure that really summarizes the key findings from assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, showing that either globally or in regions such as North America, Africa, Asia, there are solid evidence that marine species are shifting their distributions, they are changing in ecosystem structure, and that fisheries are mostly being impacted negatively. In some cases, there may be some positive impacts, but most cases negatively by climate change. Those are from published evidence or data synthesized by the IPCC.
Run the other two screens. Yeah, let's try two screens. Let's go to two screens.
Okay. Still time. The next slide would be good to see because it's difficult to describe.
There we go.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Sorry about this. I have to say, like, this is complicated setting. It's not trivial to set this up. So many moving parts. Thanks so much for making it work. And this figure really highlights that the global pictures often also mask regional
We're not
disparity.
sharing. Sorry, we're not
Oh.
sharing online anymore. We're gonna have to reshare. Go to Zoom.
Maybe start by reintroducing this slide because I've got to get my head.
Okay, yes, let's go back a slide. So this is the figure that I was showing you, I was talking about, but then didn't get to show you. Basically, IPCC already have concluded that climate change is affecting marine ecosystem in a variety of ways, shift in species distributions, changing ecosystem structures, in most cases, negative impacts on fisheries. But the impacts are not uniform across the oceans. This is not based on observation, but based on simulation modeling, the modeling that our group developed that look at how fish stocks respond to changing ocean conditions as projected under climate change by the 2050s. And this is under the business as usual high climate change scenarios. What I want to highlight is that the red pillar in the oceans that is showing the big decrease in potential nutrient availability. So this is a study that we combine our fish projections with the nutrient content of fish, particularly nutrients that are important for human consumption, omega-3 fatty acids, iron, zinc, calcium. They shows a disproportionate large impacts in many areas that are highly dependent on these nutrients as source of nutritional inputs, which is highlighted by the deep blue colors on land. So that's that mismatch, that the area where they are most needed for those nutrients are also those that need these nutrients, that are most impacted by climate change in this area. And this is really a bad story for what is going to happen in the future. And a lot of cases, what if we continue with the current trend, as we just discussed, we will be going into the black or dark trajectory there, which is the business as usual. Continue decline in nature, continue decline in food supply, or as well as exacerbating climate change. The key questions now, I think, for us is how can we bend this curve? There are lots of groups that are really actively thinking about these questions. On land, there's been colleagues really grouped together to really identify ways that we can try bending the curve. And I think we need to do that for the oceans as well. How we can bend the curve so that we can really enjoy the things that we used to enjoy and see, and that we have the steaming, diverse marine life in the oceans as before. And it is really important that we stop addressing these challenges, food security, climate change, and biodiversity conservation as separate issues. As we just clearly explored, they are clearly interconnected. So finding solutions is important, and that these solutions need to really connect these different components so that we can address co-benefits, trade-off, negative consequences, and develop really a cohesive set of solution options, and rather than working in silo. And that's really the core of the idea for this food, climate, and biodiversity nexus. So moving into the second part, I will focus on talking about the partnerships that are set out to address this challenge, looking at the food, climate, and biodiversity challenges in the nexus context. The solving the sustainability challenges at the food, climate, and biodiversity nexus, we call them Solving-FCB, is an international collaboration that aims to address the pressing and interconnected challenges at the intersections of food, climate, and biodiversity. Our goal is to co-develop transition and transformation pathway that lead us towards positive futures where all three dimensions can be balanced and sustained. And we recognize that addressing these issues require a transdisciplinary approach, bringing together experts across different disciplines, both academic and academic experts, as well as those working in different sectors, including NGOs, governments, and private sectors as well. And more specifically, this partnership is a 6-year international collaboration generously funded by the Social Science and Humanity Research Council in Canada. It was officially launched in 2002 with the inception meetings being held at UBC. This is the group photo from the inception meeting. As you can see from this photo, we have a truly diverse group, and it is an excellent team of people. We have some of the world-leading thinkers on these issues about sustainability. We have leading integrated modelers on biodiversity and ecosystem services. We have local experts. We have indigenous knowledge holders and stakeholders in our team as well. And the program is global, international, with 30 investigators and collaborators spreading across 5 different continents. The overarching objective of this partnership is to, first of all, develop pluralistic visions of desirable futures for food, climate, and biodiversity. We recognize that different communities, cultures, and stakeholders have diverse values and priorities when it comes to the oceans and its resources. So by embedding these pluralistic visions, we aim to co-create scenarios that reflect a wide range of perspectives, ensuring that the future we imagine can be inclusive and sustainable and equitable for all. The second objective is to build nexus-informed pathway for transforming the positive futures. And this involves mapping out concrete steps to move from the current trajectory to improve to something that we are desirable and that we think that it is a good ocean future. And the third component is to develop toolkits to help us to really implement that, to advise policy, to advise and stimulate actions, work with stakeholders, right holders, and knowledge holders in order to really get us into the best pathways to these good ocean futures. This is an infographic that we created from our inception meeting, one of the. And we use 3 main approaches in our work. The first one is nature positive scenarios. The nature positive scenarios, we particularly work through the nature future framework. And I will talk a little bit more about this framework in a minute. And really this helps us to envision what sustainable future would be. And then we have the integrated modeling approaches, which really is to simulate how different drivers like climate change, fisheries management can affect ecosystems, food, and human communities, as well as climate. And then using that to elucidate trade-off, synergies, co-benefits with different policy and solution options. And then finally, the decision support tool, which really help us to get involved with stakeholders, policymakers, stakeholders to identify concrete steps that we can implement these suggestions and translate the knowledge to them. So a little bit more about nature positive scenarios. One of the key approach of the Solving-FCB partnership that we use is the Nature Future Framework. This framework was originally developed by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the Scenario and Modeling Task Force, which I was part of. And it really focused on developing the good future. As you noted from the graphic featuring the poster from the movie Mad Max, the dystopian images serve as a reminder of many of our conversations about the future of the oceans that are dominated by negative and even catastrophic scenarios. And we tend to focus on what if things go wrong. But I think we need to turn the focus to bending the curve, in this case, focusing on what we can do better in order to bend the curves here. And that's really the focus of the Nature Future Framework and the Nature Positive Scenarios. And by thinking about these good ocean futures, we are asking ourselves, what does the best possible futures look like in our oceans? How can we ensure that marine ecosystems thrive and that fisheries are sustainable and that communities are who are dependent on the oceans are secure? As I said, there is the Nature Future Framework that has already been developed as a framework to explore different visions for the future of the oceans. And particularly, we explore this framework through these 3 dimensions. The dimensions really create a different perspective about what a good ocean futures can be. All of this can be good ocean futures, but we recognize that different people would have different perspective about what a good future would be. It can be nature for nature, where people are varying more on the cultural or on the intrinsic value of nature. Or it can be nature for society, where nature is more valued for the essential services that it provides to people, such as food or livelihood. Or it can be nature as culture, which has a really strong indigenous perspective in there, varying the biocultural relationship between the oceans and people. And any of the discussions about the pathway of good futures can be on the spectrum of between all of these 3 dimensions. It is not about polarizing the discussions in the different angle, but that's really placing us into what spectrum it is and make it explicit about what perspective and what value we hold. And that really helps us in moving our discussion forward about what would be the best pathway or ways that we find solutions to bend the curve to achieve the good oceans. And this is just an example of the different ways that we can envision the futures using this nature future perspective. It is fairly flexible methods. Particularly, it involves strongly the use of participatory approaches and exercise. For example of this exercise include quantitative surveys, interviews, science fiction prototyping, storytelling, graphic harvesting. The photos on the right-hand side shows a case study on the high seas. This is one of the workshop that the lead of this part of our partnership, Laura Piera, organized in South Africa, trying to use the different ways of engaging with the participants in envisioning what the nature futures for the high seas would be like. And there's also diverse type of output. It can be written, it can be pictorial, it can be represented by stories, and ultimately it can help with characterize what the high sea would be like, under the different societal setting, technological setting, economic, environmental, and political context and their challenges. So this gives you an example of what this framework can do. And this is the another element of this nature future framework is that, okay, after we create the visions, we need to know how we can achieve that visions. And to do that, we know that sometimes these visions can be very grand, and it's difficult to envision how we can translate from the present to these really lofty goals of the good future. But there has been a lot of developments about an approach and framework called the Anthropocene seeds, which is to identify seeds to transformations in the future to desirable and sustainable ocean futures. And basically, again, using various participatory approaches, we can identify these current seeds, which are basically current initiatives or ideas or organizations or initiatives that can be scaled up and going through the different phases and transitions into something that we can transform the system into somewhere where we can see as a good futures. And it can be mapped on this framework, which is called the Three Horizon Framework. Again, through participatory approaches and working with stakeholders, policymakers, stakeholders, we can identify what are the elements that this is needed in order for it to grow, as well as what are the barriers that needs to be dismantled in order for the seeds to be mature into something that can result in transformation. So these are fairly qualitative aspects of the components of exploring the positive futures or nature futures. And this can be combined with more quantitative work, particularly through modeling and applying indicators to explore possible pathways to reach a desirable positive futures. And particularly, one can imagine that there is a frontiers of this possibility of the possible futures along a spectrum of the different dimensions. So in this case, for example, nature for nature or nature for society, where the question is how we can get from the present day, and then move us towards these frontiers where one of it would characterize what we perceive as the good futures for us across the dimensions between the perspective of nature for nature or nature for society or nature for culture. I'll just give you an example where one of our postdocs, GU led, which looked at a case study in the East China Sea and South China Sea. Here, using the ecopath ecosystem modeling approaches, she characterized the frontiers for the two dimensions using two indicators. One is the ecological indicators that represent kind of the nature for nature dimensions, and then the vertical axis showing the socioeconomic performance of the fisheries, which highlight this nature for society dimensions. What she highlights is that the relative positions between the current status and the frontiers, what needs to be done to fisheries in order to move us from the current state to these frontiers, as highlighted by the different color lines. And more importantly, she also highlighted that these frontiers can be modified through changes in the drivers, such as climate change, as well as changes in societal conditions, such as the way that we structure our fisheries or society. And this really provides us with a framing about how this modeling work can be used in order to assess different pathways of achieving these future oceans perspective as identified through the Nature Future Framework activities. Another approach that we are developing and using is the socio-ecological trait-based approach. It is to explore nexus considered pathways to desirable and sustainable ocean futures. And particularly, this approach that we are pioneering in this development is to decompose socio-ecological system into different components of the traits. We can have traits that represent the sensitivities of the human or natural systems to human-induced drivers. We can have traits that look at the dimensions about the interaction between the natural and human systems. And then we can have traits that look at the decision support dimensions, looking at how these traits of both the natural and human system will relate to how people make decisions about particular solution options or particular actions. And then by reviewing the traits, compiling the traits, you can provide an indications of what actions will be more effective in achieving a particular specific goals or perspective of the future oceans. Let me give you an example illustrating how this trait approach can work. So we have been using trait-based approach, particularly ecological trait-based approach, for a long time already. And this is an example of the works that we did using biological traits to look at how different species may be resilient to climate change and fishing. So we have biological traits such as growth rate, body size, fecundity, the temperature tolerance. We use those to indicate the relative resilience of the species to climate change and overfishing. And then we can map it out so that we know which area, which systems or which fisheries are more resilient or more vulnerable to climate change or fishing. And we can also combine that with a more second dimension traits that relates to human-nature interactions. And these traits in this particular example is the nutrient density of the species, because we care about how much nutrients we can get from the ocean, from the fish. So in this case, it is about whether it is omega-3 fatty acids or calcium or protein or iron, how dense they are, these nutrients in these fish. And by combining these traits and the indicators that we got out from these traits, we can identify fish stocks, fish species that are both resilient to fishing, resilient to climate change, but then have a high nutrient density, which is an example is the area that is highlighted on the lower right left-hand side of this figure. And incidentally, many of these species are actually forage fish. So small pelagic fish, for example, that dominate these forage fish. And these are the fish that are now a lot of it used for fish meal and fish oil production. That really highlights both that this practice may not be a wise practice that divert nutrients away from human consumptions, where we identify as a particularly resilient groups of fish for solving the food, climate, and biodiversity challenges. It also then turned it around as potential opportunities for us to address these challenges. Or maybe this is something that could really help with addressing the gaps that we are facing nowadays. We applied a similar approach, and this is a work that is led by a PhD student, Alia Wong, that used the traits-based approach to look at aquaculture species, where she reviewed the traits of different aquaculture species, identified traits that are particularly good for food security or particularly good for climate or particularly good for biodiversity goals, and then combine them to get a composite index to indicate how each of the farmed species fare in the different dimensions, whether it is good for food, good for biodiversity, or good for climate change. And what it highlights, I think it confirmed that farming for lower trophic level species is good. Seaweed, many of the shellfish or mollusks are particularly good for food, climate, and biodiversity, where high trophic level species such as salmon are not comparatively less good. So this also provides a way that help us identify a potential aquaculture that could be a good opportunities to develop as food, climate, and biodiversity solutions, and also identify things that would be good to be scaled down or not expand. And then finally, the components that with the work is about the intersections between the knowledge and using that for informing actions. And this is the work that is led by our colleague Tara Martin. She had this whole framework about how to turn the scientific knowledge and expert knowledge into informing the cost effectiveness of different actions, communicate that to policymakers, stakeholders, rights holders, and then use that to inform policy options. And this is something that we hope to continue to develop in the next phase of our partnership, while we are generating more results about exploring these different solution options. So I will spend the remaining few minutes to look at the various case studies. A lot of this work are still ongoing. So it is just this. We just started just past 2 years of our partnership. So we have 4 years to go to do this. But we picked these 5 case studies to elucidate different dimensions of the food, climate, and biodiversity challenges. And I will highlight a few. I won't go through all in detail because I won't have enough time. So first of all, let me talk about Canada, which is close to us. So I would spend a little bit more time in here. And particularly in Canada, our case study is our collaborations with the Tamil Nations in Powell River. And Tamil Nation is a Coast Salish indigenous community located on the northern Sunshine Coast. It's deep-rooted with the relationship with sea and marine life. And our partnerships is grounded on a long-term relationship with them. We have been collaborating with them, both myself as well as my other PIs for over a decade on different projects and different in relation to fish and seafood and their well-being. For example, we use our simulation models to inform them about the potential climate risk on some of the most important seafood to them, both for food and culture, highlighting that they may be facing some substantial risk of decrease in the availability of those seafood in the near futures because of climate change, and that prompting them to think about how climate change should be adapted in order to maintain their food security and sovereignty. And more recently, they developed a comprehensive nation plan to really guide the directions of the governance and their actions in moving their nations forward. And one of the goals that they set is for food security. And when we discuss with them about what the project should focus on, they really want us to focus on this particular goal, because this is a cost-cutting goal that cut across many of the other goals within their comprehensive nation plan, including climate change or environment. And particularly, they want to answer the questions of how is the implementations of their modern-day treaty support solutions for food, climate, and biodiversity for the nation, and how can the nations improve food security and nutritional security moving forward under climate change. So these are the 2 high-level questions that they pose that they want us together to answer. And one of the recent example of activities that we work with them is that we organize with them together a food security workshop to identify climate adaptation strategies, facilitate the space and time to actually for them to bring their people together to discuss about this topic, so that they won't address that in silos. They can collaborate and cooperate in identifying solution options, and particularly facilitating their interdepartmental links and break silos. And we undertook the seed exercise, identifying what are the seeds that they want, their current initiative and their and proposed initiative to address food security and sovereignty challenges through various participatory exercise. And right now, our master students, Mihi Silit, is helping them to analyze the seeds that we collected and applying a trait-based approach, trying to explore like what kind of seeds have the potential to grow to address the food security climate challenges that they pose as a question to us, and then bringing back to the community and discuss with them how these results can be relevant in their planning or for the implementations of their comprehensive plan for their nations. And then we have the case studies in Costa Rica that particularly focusing on the Gulf of Nicoya. I won't go into it in details, but basically this case studies focus on land-sea interaction. In this part of the coast, there is intensive development of agriculture, and that leading to a loss of influence on the Gulf, which is a semi-enclosed sea. So one of the things that they want to address is to see how they can address these challenges, particularly through nature-based solutions. And this is an area where there are lots of small-scale fisheries, a very productive area, but then it is also impacted by many human activities. They want to address these challenges, particularly focusing on the lens of the land-sea interaction. We have related studies that is offshore in Costa Rica, and looking at marine protected area, and particularly looking at the transboundary marine protected areas across the 3 countries in Central America. And this work is not directly funded by the partnership, but then it is co-funded by the Landsfest Ocean Program. And so it is still on good, but it adds another dimensions of explorations to our works. We have a case study in China that look at aquaculture, and particularly seaweed aquaculture. And seaweed aquaculture has been really expansively going in China. This is an example of the area that is currently farming seaweed, in addition to Albanoni, where I visit as part of my field site visits for the partnership. And they want to answer questions related to the potential of seaweed aquaculture as a solution for food, climate, and biodiversity, but then also what are the trade-offs, what are the negative consequences, and how to make it work that seaweed aquaculture could be part of the solution options. We have case study in the Netherlands, we have case study in Ghana and Nigeria. I won't go into that in details, but it really elucidates other dimensions of this work. So ultimately, what we want is that we want to synthesize these different experience and options, combining the global scale work with case study works to really identify what are the potential portfolio of solution options that can take us to the good future. And how does it work in different contexts? Because we know that context also change this portfolio or mixture of solution options that would take us to the future. And our partnership is set up for that because we have both academic partners, we have non-academic partners from different level, international level, regional level, local levels. We have WorldFish, for example. We have globally, we have Melviva, which focus on, for example, in Costa Rica and Central America. And we are fitting our work into various policy discussion forum at different level, IPCC, WTO, as well as local level with governments and municipalities and local communities. So with that, I hope that it really brings me back to these questions at the end. I hope that by the end of the partnerships, I can help answer the first questions that I pose. What kind of ocean futures in terms of food, climate, and biodiversity that my nephews will experience. And I hope that when I talk to them, I can answer that they can have a chance of getting a good oceans, something that would not be a dystopian futures of the ocean, but something that would be something that they would like to live in. And I think that this is the same for many of our colleagues around the world that would want to answer us and tell their people as well. With that, I want to thank, this is just the UBC team there. There are much bigger teams globally with our partnership, but thank you so much. Thank you.
So we've got questions probably coming in online. Do we have any yet? Okay, they'll come, and obviously we can take questions here. So I think William knows everybody, so I'll let him take his own questions. But if you do have questions, now's your chance to explore this very grand project as well as important ambitions. I'll let William just take it.
Yes, please.
Examples where the recommendations have been implemented by governments around the world. One or two.
Yeah, so that's a difficult. So shall I repeat the questions? Yes, so the question is an example of how recommendation has been recommendation has been implemented in the world. I think like at a global level, that's challenging. I mean, even with I think first of all, from our partnership is only the second year, so we haven't yet been able to have that long-term engagement that can really see the changes in the policy at that time scale. But in the lines of work that I have experienced over time, at the international level, changes are often slow and is incremental. But I've seen changes at the local level. So for example, in the works that I showed earlier on in Hong Kong, where there has been this long-term engagement with colleagues, both governments and NGOs in Hong Kong about overfishing in Hong Kong, both from colleagues in here, as well as myself, that we provide information about the need to reform the fisheries management, including banning trawlings, setting up protected areas, and it takes a long time, take decades for them to actually fully implement that. But much of our recommendations actually got implemented. They implemented a trawl ban around 5 years or so ago. They implement our recommendations of buying out the trawl fisheries because Hong Kong is a wealthy city, so they can do that. They recommend some of our recommendations about setting up protected area in certain locations and how to manage them. So I think that's kind of an example. But I have to say, it is a good example. But my experience would be that even with that, it needs long-term engagement and commitment, both from the counterparts as well as from the researchers, really continuously engaging with them. Okay.
From Philippe, he's asking, does the project look into sea level rise effects on low-lying farmlands and biodiversity hotspots and ways to ensure a better future for food security and biodiversity in exposed coastal areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The question is about sea level rise. So the sea level rise is not in our case study, it isn't a main drivers that we look at in terms of the climate drivers. A lot of it is looking at warming, ocean acidifications, deoxygenations, but sea level rise is an important factor, particularly on coastal communities. And I think that may come up with the case study, particularly in Costa Rica, and that it could become one of the drivers that would bring up by the communities as one of the things that they're really concerned about that ask us to address.
There are some really obvious outputs of this program that you'd be aiming for, publications and presentations and trainings and all the rest. But I mean, you, like the rest of us, are really committed to outcomes. So just to pick up on the first question, what are the metrics for success for this Nexus program that actually will translate into other people engaging with this to a level where it affects change? Because we have a great many lofty think tanks on these things.
Yeah.
And they're not getting us anywhere.
Yeah.
So where is the practicality of this? And what would make you feel that was 5 years of well-invested, 5 years, 6 years,
6 years
of well-invested effort, where you actually, picking up that first question, you see further measurable uptake by the people who can make decisions, and then better yet, hopefully the translation of that into action, right?
That's really good. So I think in short, the question is about how we can make sure that the outputs can translate into good outcomes that would inform actions and policy changes that could take us to the program would do. Yeah. So I think this is something that I'm quite optimistic because we in the setting of the program, we really in many cases involve directly the policymakers and decision makers and action takers in our design and co-development of the projects. So for example, the case studies in Telemann, we work together with the nations. So in the workshops, we actually co-develop the workshop. It is not something that we go there and run for them. They actually basically have someone to design the workshop with us and making sure that it fit with what their needs. What they need, they say that is that they have the gaps of coordinating different departments in taking actions. They recognize that climate change is important, food security is important, but people just don't have that space to coordinate that. So they want to use these opportunities to do that. And that workshop actually come up with a set of, at the same time, it really overlaid with them needing an initiative that they can submit to get funding to develop initiative for food security for them. And that workshops provide that space for them to develop that proposal. And at the end of the workshop, they actually come up with a proposal that work together between the different departments using the seeds that we identified as some of the components of the proposal and apply for funding to get those initiatives off the ground. So I think this is an example, although it is small actions, but it is something that provide that next step already of driving changes to the next step. for example, in the example of the Costa Rica, we go to, in this case, a much bigger scale, international scale, the Costa Rica, the Ocean Conference there, and the management authorities of the transboundary MPAs got to know our projects and got really interested in how our outputs can inform their management. So they inform our Costa Rican counterparts to actually participate in their management meetings to see how our outputs can inform their management, the transboundary management of their MPAs. So again, this is a small step, but it is a positive step of really translating the research into something that can change management or policy on the ground.